think the theme that I picked up from all of the speakers this morning, we certainly discussed on our table over there, is that there is actually quite a shared analysis of what the problems are. And the big one is inequality. There's some analysis that was started by Wilkinson and Pickett, over a decade ago, called the Spirit Level, which all the speakers referenced in one way or another during the course of the morning's events, which is about societies which are unequal are also less prosperous. And you pick up things around education, and you pick up things about human capital, you pick up things about social capital, if you address the challenge of inequality. And so for me, and for my organisation and the organisations that we represent in the third sector, the way to crack the economic challenge, the vision, if you like, is all about dealing with the inequalities in society. And that's not just about income inequality, it's not just about dealing with pockets of poverty, it's other sorts of inequality. Gender inequality, I'm glad we've got 3 women on the panel at last. It's about digital inequality, getting people online so they've got the same access to the same audiences. It's about health inequality, encouraging people to live well, not just longer. And all of these things are contributors to a healthy economy. So you can't just look at economic development in isolation. You've got to have a vision for the kind of society and economy that you want to live in.
Karen, from a straightforward economic development point of view, that's quite a departure from the sort of received orthodoxies of the past, let's say, 20 years, which essentially said you've got a social agenda over in here, and you've got the market over there. And really what we need to do is try and marry the one to the other. But what Lucy's saying, and what's coming out of the room, and what came out of several of the presentations this morning, is that they're indivisible. That if you fix equality, you fix the economy as well. And that there ought to be ways of fixing the economy that fix the equality issues. How does that work? I mean, you're very much on the economic development side. How does that look from where you sit?
Complicated, I think, is the simple answer, I think, to that. But that doesn't mean to say we should shy away from those aspirations, because I think the theme of bottom-up has got to be absolutely right. But I equally think we have to have that top-down as well, because I think one or two of the messages were, where's the vision, where's the leadership, where's the focus? And I think sometimes that top-down can provide that. But if it's not connected to the bottom-up approach, then we end up exactly in the territory that I think, Lucy, you've described to us. So we have to address that broader approach. So how do you address that broader approach? Well, I think there is a lot of challenge there, and certainly if you just think about an economic approach which tends to focus on job creation and getting people into work, that is quite simple, but even that is a challenge. And one of the things I think we have to start looking at, which I'd probably sort of start going into some of the vision, is how do you create economic resilience? And certainly for economies like North Ayrshire, but they'll be true of quite a lot of other economies in Scotland. We have an opportunity now as we look forward over the next economic cycle, and hopefully we're now coming into a more positive economic cycle. But one thing I think I would guarantee is that we'll have a downturn at some point in the future. We won't know exactly when, but there will be a downturn. We have a responsibility to think through how do we create a resilient economy that actually can take advantage of the good times and make sure that we're addressing some pretty complex issues, but sees us well into a downturn and that we're not overly or disproportionately hit in a downturn. And getting some of that right as well is still going to be a challenge.
But and let me ask you this, the same question, but from your perspective as somebody who's worked on the equality side of that equation. I mean, am I right in thinking there is a sea change taking place in thinking about this in Scotland? We're no longer compartmentalising the economic agenda from the social justice agenda?
Yes and no. I welcome the fact, and again, I couldn't get over the fact that inequality was mentioned by all of the speakers this morning. And it is something, I've worked in equalities for many, many years, and we spent a long time with inequality agencies trying to engage economic development agencies to say, look, this is really important, and equality of opportunity has something really vital to add to the economy. So I'm delighted. I do think there have been changes, but I do think we've got a long way to go. And to pick up on something that Robin McAlpin said this morning, and I think it's quite key, is around structures in the labour market. And it's interesting that education come up, because I do think that is a crucial one. But again, we had, just last year, figures coming out from the Women in Scotland's Economy research unit to see that 1 in 10 people in Scotland are currently underemployed. So as well as we need to be looking at, yes, we are very much in a kind of low skill, low pay economy. We do, on the other side of the spectrum, have a lot of highly skilled and intelligent people flipping burgers, so we have to kind of look at that when we're thinking about education as well, and it is around the structures of the labour market. We've got far more part-time employment, for example, as well. We've got far more men in part-time employment now, so there are big shifts in the labour market, but we've still got a long way to go.
Can I start with some thoughts maybe about business? And I speak a lot to business. And one of the things that I've noticed in this last 12 months or so, there is a real correlation between those businesses that we are seeing growing or getting ready to grow as we perhaps enter into a more positive economic cycle, and those that take a very long-term approach with their workforce. And what I mean by that is that they really see that they invest in their workforce. Whether they're looking at taking on a young modern apprentice or somebody much more experienced. What's key to the businesses that seem to have success either through difficult times or the prospects of growth over the next few years are those that have really taken a very proactive, investment-focused, empowered approach with their workforce. And that's been noticeable to me, so positive. The other thing I'd perhaps like to pick up on is the education piece, because that's come up a few times, and we're starting to make a distinction between employment and employability. So very much starting to look at employment to meet that business need. And I've been, I suppose, not unduly surprised given my background, but it has been a bit of an eye-opener as we've started to look quite clearly at the relationship between education through our school system and starting off in the primary, going through senior phase, through the FE, HE training and into business. And you hope there's a nice, neat alignment. But there isn't, or there certainly isn't in North Ayrshire, and I suspect we're not alone. So actually just talking to business and saying, are you getting the sorts of skills that you need? And the answer is sometimes, but not always. But are you, by the way, engaged with the college, the HE, or the schools? Well, no, not really. It's all very complicated. We don't really know. We don't understand. It's that thing that happens way over there. So what we've been working hard on is actually getting businesses right at the heart of engaging in the curriculum and actually understanding and starting to influence the shape of what that curriculum might be, and working with the college similarly in creating pathways so that the pupils, the parents, and they're critical, can start to get that visibility of what it might look like as they go through, if they want to go particularly. We've been looking at hospitality and engineering and construction have been the main sectors. But one of the sort of key changes in approach is just that relationship between business, the education sector, whether that's FE or higher, and the school.
Well, I suppose just on a kind of enterprise point, really, because someone raised, a kind of entrepreneurial dynamic or whatever. And thinking about in Scotland between 2008 and 2012, when we were in the kind of deepest, darkest bits of the recession, the self-employment increased by 13%. And certainly the majority of those who went into self-employment, 3/4 of those were men. But we did see an increase of 9% for women going into self-employment. So I think it does ask the question about, well, what was that about? Was that about lack of available jobs for these people? Or was it about a success of the policies that maybe we have in terms of developing entrepreneurs and businesses, or, you know, are some of the messages getting through from education or whatever about entrepreneurial spirit or dynamism or whatever you want. So, you know, I think there's an interesting discussion to be had there about times in deep recession, you know, but you end up with increases in self-employment.
Lucy, taking the room as a whole there, which is perhaps slightly unfair because people were focusing in different areas. It's a very ambitious, very aspirational shopping list. Is it a realistic one?
I think it's absolutely a realistic one, and I think what is really encouraging about the discussion today is that people are taking a step out of where we've been in the debate in the past and actually challenging the old sort of paradigms and trying to embrace new ones. One of the things that has struck me about various discussions is thinking about the nature of work. And that comes right from the very global level that says that you can communicate just as easily with, well, that happens to be my brother in Hangzhou in China as I can with my brother who lives in Huddersfield in Yorkshire. It's just like that now. The technology and the globalisation means that you can do things in fundamentally different ways, which is why I think we have to think quite radically about what we mean by a job, what we mean by the nature of work. Is part-time necessarily bad? Is working from home necessarily bad? Do we have to think about it being somebody who goes to a factory and stands at a conveyor belt? You can communicate and discuss innovation and change and new ways of doing things from where you live. Even, you know, once the broadband infrastructure is fully rolled out in some of the most remote rural areas of Scotland. And that also then gives rise to a different way of thinking about jobs that aren't just about making things. It's productivity of a different kind. And if you listen to the futurists and technologists, they'll tell you that all the basic nuts and bolts jobs are going to be automated before very much longer. In fact, you heard it from, was it Fabian that talked about the intelligence of computers within 10 years. But from where I sit and the kinds of jobs of the people that work within my sector, those jobs aren't going to go. People are still going to need people. What we need to do is value the jobs where people work with people more. We need to reward it better and enable people to get trained up and moved into those kinds of roles in a way that meets their needs, that is paid well, that is flexible, that means that they can look after their own families as well as people in other people's families. So you need a sort of radical whole think about what a job looks like, how it's rewarded, how it works with other people, how it communicates beyond people's immediate quarters.
Thank you for all of that.